In a quiet town nestled near the edge of a forest, there lived a parrot named Max, who was not just any ordinary bird. Max was an African grey parrot, known for their intelligence, but even by those standards, Max was something special. He belonged to Mrs. Perkins, an elderly woman who had lived alone since her husband passed away. Max had been her companion for nearly a decade, and over the years, he had learned to speak hundreds of words and phrases. But what set Max apart wasn't just his ability to mimic, it was how he understood the world around him. Max could hold conversations, answer questions with surprising accuracy, and even give Mrs. Perkins gentle reminders, like when to take her medication. "Max, remind me to take my pills at noon," said Mrs. Perkins. Max had learned to identify the hourly chimes played by Mrs. Perkins' grandfather clock. As soon as he heard the 12 chimes, Max would squawk, "Pills, Mrs. Perkins, pills!" One chilly autumn day, something happened that would change both of their lives forever. Mrs. Perkins was in the garden, tending to her flowers, when she tripped over a loose stone and fell hard. She tried to get up, but the pain in her leg was unbearable. She had broken her hip. The house was too far, and there was no one around to help. Max, perched by the window, saw everything. Mrs. Perkins had always treated him like more than just a pet. She spoke to him as if he were her family, and over the years, he had come to understand her emotions and needs. Now Max realized something was very wrong. The clever parrot flew out of the open window and landed beside Mrs. Perkins. "Help! Help!" he squawked, mimicking the word he had often heard her say when she was struggling with something, but there was no one nearby to hear. Max took off again, this time flying toward the neighbor's house. He landed on the porch and began calling out, "Help! Help!" His voice was loud, urgent, and persistent. Luckily, the neighbors, a young couple named Sarah and John, heard the unusual noise. At first, they thought it was a random bird, but when they opened the door, there was Max, flapping his wings frantically and calling for help. Sarah said in astonishment, "That's Mrs. Perkins' parrot." Something must be wrong. The couple followed Max, who flew back toward the garden where Mrs. Perkins lay, still unable to move. Sarah gasped when she saw her and quickly dialed emergency services while John stayed with her, offering comfort. "I don't know how you found help, Max, but you did," Mrs. Perkins whispered through her pain, reaching out a trembling hand to the parrot. He nuzzled her gently, almost as if to say, "I've got you." Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, and Mrs. Perkins was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said she was lucky to have been found so quickly, as lying there much longer could have made her condition worse. Throughout the entire ordeal, Max never left her side. News of Max's heroic actions spread through the town, and soon even beyond. People were amazed by the intelligence and loyalty of the little parrot who had saved his owner's life. Reporters came to interview Mrs. Perkins, and Max became somewhat of a local celebrity. But for Mrs. Perkins, Max was more than a hero. He was her best friend. After she returned home from the hospital, Max continued his role as a watchful companion. He had a special perch near her bed, where he would keep a close eye on her. And whenever Mrs. Perkins needed anything, Max seemed to sense it before she even spoke. One day, as she stroked his soft grey feathers, she smiled and said, "You know, Max, you're more than just a parrot. You're my guardian angel." Max, ever the clever bird, replied in his cheerful voice, "Guardian angel, Mrs. Perkins." From that day forward, that's exactly what he was. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe below.